It was pretty tough. Hospice definitely made it much easier. It was just very emotional, constantly roller coaster. Knowing what your goal was, what the end outcome would be, was very difficult. But we gave hospice a call, and they came in and they laid out the program as to how it would go, and we thought, yeah, right. And then as we started getting into it, they were right. It was pretty much exactly as they had laid out to us. We actually had taken my father into the hospital. We were taking him in every couple of weeks, and one of the doctors there was very rude, we felt, and would see us there all the time. And he finally came in and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, my father has congestive heart surgery. Or congestive heart failure. He needs a derivative to take the fluid off his lungs. But why are you doing here? What are you doing here?" He kept asking me that, and I kept giving him another question. Finally, he said, "Is this where you want to die? Because that's what's happening. You're at the end of your life, and your father's going to die, and do you want him to die here?" And we all said, "No." He said, "Well, you need to call hospice." And he left, and he discharged us, and that was it. And we were like, oh, how rude. And probably one of my worst times was calling hospice, because every time I call, I'd hang up. It was like calling the Grim Reaper. You know, you hear the voice and you'd hang up. Once I finally got the courage to talk after hanging up so many times, the poor person on the other end, it was great. Every time I've called, they were wonderful people. They didn't matter day or night, but they came in and they said that the doctor was right. You do need hospice, and that you don't need to go to the hospital anymore. We can help you from your home, and you don't need to keep checking in and going through that. It was always very dramatic at the emergency room. And it just became so easy. If something was wrong or he had a fever, you'd call hospice and they would tell me what to do, or they would come out, send someone out and check on him and do it from there. So it was a terrible first call, but after you got the courage to speak, it was wonderful for us. So that led me to my mother's, calling them for my mother. The caregivers, from the nurses, there was Mary Ann, and there was a Christine and a Natalie with my father. We took them out to eat after my father passed, but they were like family. We called them at any time. Mary Ann Nancy was my mother's social worker, and Mary Ann she would always say, "I'm Mary Ann, the hospice nurse," and I knew right away it was Mary Ann, just by her voice. But she always said, "I'm Mary Ann, the hospice nurse," and they were just wonderful people. They were very caring, and I felt like they were just there for me, that they didn't have 10 other patients to go to that day. It felt like they were just there for me or calling for me. How am I doing? What can I do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? I mean, that was always their conversation, and every time we spoke or they called us or I seen them at the nursing home. My father I kept at home, and my mother was in a nursing home, and I actually was in one nursing home, and they said, "Your mother qualifies for hospice, that you're not doing anything to sustain her life." And so I said, "Great," and they put me in with a different hospice, and I said, "Well, wait a minute, I deal with Volusia Flagler Hospice," and they said, "Well, Volusia Flagler comes to your home, and we do it in the nursing home," which made very good sense to me because my dad was in the home, and that's why we used Volusia Flagler Hospice. Well, this was a different hospice. Didn't realize it, and I seen different things that was happening, and I wasn't comfortable, and I finally said, I don't want my mom on anything that would sustain her life. She has dementia. She didn't know me. She couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and they were giving her these pills that were blood pressure pills, things that were life-sustaining, and I said, "No, I don't want that." So I signed a paper saying I did not want my mother to have those type of drugs. I wanted her to be comfortable, and that was all I wanted from them. When another nurse came in, she proceeded to tell me what type of drugs my mother was on, and I was like, "Wait a minute, that's not the drugs my mother's on. I've already signed those off." They were going to a different pharmacist. I had Florida Health Care, and normally they would call my Florida Health Care. I would pick up the prescription and take it in. This time, they were calling a different pharmacy and getting them themselves and taking them to her. And later on, I found out that they were for-profit hospice, and that my biggest, I get on the soapbox all the time because my biggest thing is to tell people that there are hospices out there, but there are for-profit. So you've got the nursing home making money, you've got the doctors making money, you've got hospice making money. When is your family going to be able to just have a merciful death? Death with dignity. My mom was past that. She was in diapers. That wasn't going to happen, but a merciful death, that's what I was hoping for, and I would have never gotten with this other hospice. And I didn't know, and I've been helping hospice since '04 in different charities or different things that they would do that I would help out with. And so I knew very much about Volusia Flagler Hospice. And here I get caught up with a for-profit hospice that I never realized. So I try to tell people those real cloudy commercials where they're walking hand in hand and everybody's real comfy and call hospice, they're for profit. They can afford to make those commercials because they are for profit. And Volusia Flagler does everything as was asked. I never questioned anything that they did. They never questioned anything that I was asking of. And it was very difficult to get Volusia Flagler Hospice. The other hospice did not want to let them go. And in Volusia County, there's 5 hospices in Volusia County. 4 of them are for profit. 1 is nonprofit. And I think that's very substantial information that you need before you call a hospice. What type of hospice is it? I don't think people realize that there's hospices out there for profit.
So were you able then to transfer the care of your mother to Volusia Flagler?
Volusia Flagler was wonderful. The nursing home was set with this other hospice, and they would not let Volusia Flagler Hospice in. They actually went and sat for 2 days at the doctor's office because the doctor would not allow them to see my mother. They sat for 2 days in the doctor's office to where finally when they closed the second day, they allowed to see the doctor and got permission to go in and see my mother, and we were able to transfer hospice from one hospice, the profit, to the nonprofit hospice, but it was not easy. It was very traumatic for me because I just couldn't believe I got caught up. I got caught up in this other hospice that was doing their own thing, and it wasn't about my mom, is what it was. And I wanted it to be about my mom, whatever it is to comfort my mom at that time. Well, again, I wanted my mom to only have comfort meds, and she went to the nursing home and she was getting, say, 1,200, 1,500 calories a day in supplemental milkshakes and things like that, keeping her weight up, keeping her nutrition going through all these supplemental shakes. And I was very much against that. Again, I wanted it to be nothing life-sustaining. I wanted my mom to pass away with dignity. She would not like to have been in this nursing home for that long, and she would not have liked to have diapers on. That was not my mother. And they stepped in and they fought for me. They spoke with the doctors. They called a meeting for the nursing home. We got several of the administrators and the nurses there, and they all went to bat for me, and we came out that's where they stopped these supplemental shakes, which I could not get done by myself. It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. It's a hard time no matter what, but it was like a great step. It was a great step forward. I can remember emailing my friends and all and saying that how, it was a big step that we had made to get rid of these supplemental shakes that I felt were sustaining her life. Just because she couldn't eat, then we'll give her these shakes and that will keep her going longer. That's not what I wanted. That's not what she would have wanted. And so it was great when they stepped in and took care of the problem. I say if the prognosis is death, then you need to call hospice. I tell that to most anyone that would, when I hear their story about how their parents or grandfather's doing or something, give hospice a call and they'll look over your situation. They'll tell you whether they can help or not. But it was say for my mom being in the nursing home, I'm the only one that lives here that cares for my mother. And so I was the only one going. And if I went every day or I go a day without it, I would feel very guilty. But when hospice stepped in, it was a day that they would call and say, I'm sitting with your mother and she's doing fine. I didn't have to go in that day. And so at the end of that day, I wasn't as depressed as I would be when I walk the halls of the nursing home and then walk out leaving her there. You have to give back. If you've taken, you have to give it back. And this is a wonderful organization. And in my generation, the baby boomers, we have to get a grip on what we're going to do with our lives. We're taking money away from children's education, and yet we're keeping all these people alive in nursing homes that wouldn't want to be alive if they could have a say. They're laying there with their mouths open or a little bit of oxygen, and they're there for months and months. And we have to get a grip on what we're going to do or how we're going to proceed with all these baby boomers. Right now when I was growing up, there was gas stations on every corner. Now there's pharmacists and nursing homes. So are all of us going to want to stay in a nursing home for 2 or 3 years before we pass? I just don't think so. I know I don't want to follow the path my mother followed. But we didn't have any answers. We didn't know about this. Now we do. And many people in my shoes that had children as well as parents to care for, they're trying to find what kind of answer is there, and I don't know what that answer is. I'm not that smart, but we do have to get something in order to where we don't go through all of this. And hospice helps us pass, and they have to have better laws to, if you're only existing, that's not a life. Existence is not a life. And once we start just existing, then we have to have laws or help to help us have a merciful death.